Great. Cheri, I'm so glad to have you on the We Rise podcast today. Thanks so much for joining. Will you introduce yourself? Tell us about you. Tell us about your background so folks know who I have the delight of speaking to today, please.
Sure. Thank you so much, Christine. It is a pleasure to be here. Um, so my whole life has pretty much been about supporting people and organizations and communities to recognize and use their full potential,
Mm.
um, i- including my own. And
Yeah.
it's taken many, many forms. I've worked with parents and childcare providers, social services. For a while, I was in outdoor experiential education, working with students and then organizational leaders and teams. And it took me until, probably 8 or 9 years ago to recognize there was this common thread through everything that I do, um, all the way up to the the book that I published with Jackie Stavros in 2018, and
Mhm.
recognizing that's how people use their full potential through their conversation. So
Mm.
it's really nice to have been able to look back and said, oh, I see there was a purpose all the way through these.
Yeah. Well, tell us about the book title, if you will, and of course we'll include links to that in the show notes and how you found through your work, Cheri, that conversations are this way to unlock potential.
Great. Thank you. So the book is called Conversations Worth Having.
Mhm.
And when I was in the outdoor experiential ed field, uh, after about 5 years working in a permanent ropes course facility at a college, um, a colleague and I designed a portable low ropes course so that we could then give schools and nonprofit organizations and community members the equipment and then teach them to facilitate, because they're far more effective if they're done over time instead of a one-shot deal.
Mhm.
And we had been facilitating from um, a strength-based debriefing strategy, focusing on what people did well, why they were able to succeed. But most people we were trying to train were focused on when people fell off,
Mm.
looking at the problem and trying to fix it, which
Huh.
is how we're
Yeah.
all trained.
Right.
And so we were having a significant challenge in being able to be explicit about our facilitation approach. And I happened at one of the outdoor experiential conferences, um, got introduced by somebody who had attended David Cooper Ryder's first training on appreciative inquiry.
Okay. Mhm.
And appreciative inquiry is a strength-based approach to organizational change. And there were four basic steps which mapped directly to Kolb's learning cycle.
Mhm.
And David had done all the research on positive image, positive action. And so there now we had this explicit model. And then fast forward 20 years, and we
Mhm.
finally realized that the kind of the basis of appreciative inquiry was asking generative questions and using a positive frame for your conversation. And if you do those two simple things, your relationships strengthen, you can manage and access creativity and connection around any topic, and it just facilitates greater success and well-being in your life.
Hmm, beautiful. So, how did you bring that in? So, you have this like really interesting example from the ropes course where people are falling off and focusing on the problem. Did you end up using a similar process of appreciative inquiry on the ropes course to kind of continue that analogy? Or could you walk us through what a conversation using appreciative inquiry might look like with a team who's on a ropes course or off?
Sure. So let's say, and if any of your listeners have never been on a ropes course, they are experiential activities that are designed so the only way the team can succeed is if they work together, support each other, kind of
Mhm.
draw out their inherent teamwork and leadership skills, and then afterwards you debrief, and the idea is for them to learn and then use it as a metaphor to take back into the workplace or into school or life, most of those activities look impossible at the beginning.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
it's really easy to, when you're observing from the outside, to be able to see either why somebody keeps having to start over, because if they
Mm,
usually if they fall off or they touch something they're not supposed to, everybody starts over again. um, and so very often people facilitating would look at, so when you fell off there, what was going wrong?
mm,
How can you fix that? And so that you can actually get through.
mhm,
But instead, what we would do is we we would just tell people they have to start over. And
mhm,
we didn't debrief until the very end. And at the very end, they've succeeded. And
mhm,
so it was really looking at, so how did you succeed? What did it take? And you might have, we were looking for those especially challenging points where they succeeded to say, what
mhm,
did you do there?
mm,
And then we could draw the analogy into what would that look like in the workplace?
mhm,
Um, and one of the things that I realized when I finally left the experiential learning, uh, like ropes course facilitation, was I finally realized the leadership skills and the teamwork capacity were inherent. We weren't teaching
mm.
any of that. It was the structure of the activity that was bringing it out. And so at one point I went, oh, I need to shift and have the facilitation around the structure of, what is it about the structure of the organization that you were able to be creative and successful, um, and and that was not very informative to most people. And so
Mm,
that's
mhm,
when I went into organizational development and change to look at, how do you create structures that give people the kind of autonomy that allow them to bring their inherent leadership and creativity
mm.
and teamwork to bear in an organization, or a community.
Yeah,
Same thing in
absolutely.
communities.
Hmm. That's fascinating. One side question, you talked earlier about the positive cycles in some of the, early research. And to bring it back to the ropes course, did you find that when facilitators focused on the challenge, why did you fall off? Did it reinforce a negative loop and make people less able to succeed versus letting their own inherent wisdom help guide them to the way
Yeah,
across? Tell us about that, Cheri,
yeah,
that
very.
process and how it relates to your work in
It's
communities. And then the second part of the question, which I'm happy to repeat later, is what are those structures? So tell us about that, those loops and cycles.
okay. So, yeah, that's very insightful observation and question. That whatever we focus on and pay attention to, that's what grows.
Absolutely.
Um, and actually, the research shows that for highly dysfunctional teams, focusing on the problem makes it worse for them.
Mm,
If you've
yes.
got a really highly functional team, you can name a problem and then get out of the way because they're
Uh-huh.
going to solve it.
Ah, yes.
Um, but yeah, so focusing on what's working, it just builds capacity. And the other reason that happens is neurophysiologically, is that when we're focused on what's working and what we're doing well, uh, we feel safer, we feel more connected, we get into
Mm-hmm.
that space of we, and then we have full access to our neocortex and the prefrontal lobe. And when you're
Mm-hmm.
like, you fell off, it's like, oh, I feel defensive and I have to protect myself. And then I lose my ability to learn. I lose my ability to think critically or creatively.
Mm-hmm. So is it that moving into a fear-based place is for communities or parents or ropes course members is looking at the challenge really moving people into the amygdala, if you will, or moving into the fight, flight, or freeze place versus moving into having the ability for creative problem solving and tell us a little bit about how people maybe who are stuck in that place of fear or the challenge, how does this process help move them into the realm of possibility?
And when you say this process, which
Mm,
process?
it's a great question. focusing on appreciative inquiry as a process, focusing on allowing people to figure out the solution on their own, creating the structure, the
Okay.
process,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot, it's probably a lot of the body of your work, but it's so fascinating. So what you guide people through now.
Okay. Um, yes, I think fear is, and we've got so much of it in our culture right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we propagate fear, the less capable we are as communities or as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great control technique.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think there really is, if we shift our the mindset away from this, like we're isolated, we're alone, our communities are made up of all these like individual pieces and parts. If we were to shift the mindset into we're a whole living system,
Mm-hmm.
and each one of us is an integral part. Everything we do, we could, if everyone could bring their strengths and gifts and passions and interests with a primary purpose of helping the system flourish,
Mm.
there would be no stopping us.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So
and
true.
and by asking generative questions, which are questions that make the invisible visible or help create shared understanding, they generate new information or they create possibilities. When you do that, it brings people alive and they're
Mm.
able to tap into their own creativity. And when communities think together, the, they're able to come up with much better solutions to really complex problems. And I think that one of the things that stops community leadership from doing that is a fear of losing control of the outcome.
Mm. Yeah.
And the thing they need to let go of is the outcome. So there's nothing to be afraid of.
Right.
Because where we are in the world today, I don't think we can't predict the outcome. We have to co create it, and then keep co creating the next outcome and the next one and the next one. And if we're trying to predict it and control it, we're going to hold back the aliveness in our communities and in our people.
Mm-hmm. So well said. So, what does that look like, Cheri, in your work with organizations? You know, if you have, so I'm thinking of some folks I'm working with who have had some challenging times over the last year, particularly, and the outcome is a scary place. You know, what the outcome might be for the group is a scary place. Um, this is a group that we're new to working with. So, how, in an example like that, or other examples from your work, what does this process look like of creating the structures to? I mean, I love the way you frame that to bring forth the aliveness, to move into the realm of possibility. What are the generative questions to help the system flourish, and so people don't focus on their own self-interest only? What does that look like?
That's a really good question. I think I think that's what we are, kind of at the edge of organizations who have leadership, who are um, working to foster the full potential of the organization. Um, they're they're kind of taking off the heavy bureaucratic structures which
Mm,
block so many people, and instead looking at how do we create internal structures or ways of functioning that allow people to be agile at the most local level, to have the greatest amount of autonomy, and then
mm-hmm,
give them enough learning, training, understanding, and growth opportunities so they know how to make the best decisions for the whole at the
mm-hmm,
local level.
mm-hmm,
And so in some of the organizations, what that looks like is the HR department is no longer there.
mm-hmm,
And instead, hiring and onboarding goes on at the local level.
mm-hmm,
And it means like the top management layer gets quite small.
Mm-hmm.
And middle managers might go away or become resource people and coaches as opposed to overseeing the work. Um, and so it's looking at how do we minimize the structures and maximize the potential of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that I think is supporting that is organizations having a very strong purpose that everyone aligns with.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Absolutely.
Sometimes mission and vision can get in the way of innovation,
Mm,
but purpose usually inspires innovation.
that's interesting. Can you talk a little bit more about how you see groups, either that, maybe a network or a collaborative or a community, how do they articulate what their purpose is as
Mm.
distinct from a mission and vision?
Um, Really good question. Um, let me give you an example. This
Great.
isn't an example for a community, but it's an organizational example of a company that used to be the leading company in manufacturing drill bits,
Mm-hmm.
and um, competition was starting to rise, and they were losing their margin. And so they were trying to uh, figure out how can we be more innovative? How can, what can we do to get
Right.
back in the leadership position? Um, and the consultant that they were working with went to purpose. And it wasn't what is your purpose yourself as the organization, but the organization is serving a purpose which is bigger than the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is it outside of your organization? And they started talking about, well, our customers. And what are your customers? What's their purpose? And finally, somebody said, well, our customers are trying to make holes. And all the light bulbs went on, and they started talking about what are other ways we could make holes
Huh.
instead of
Uh-huh.
drill bits. And they invented laser drills.
Oh, interesting. How fascinating. Uh-huh.
And so the purpose became, uh, the purpose became bigger, and it became defined by um, the what the customer was trying to do,
Mm-hmm. That's so
as opposed
fascinating.
to, yeah,
Right. So it sounds like in that example, it was not just what is the company trying to do, but what's the broader, who are we serving? What is their end goal? And how do we fit within this broader kind of
uh,
ecosystem of
yes,
what the need is rather than being stuck at a level where it might continue to have an organization be self-reflective within themselves rather than a higher
yes.
question they're learning. That's so
Yeah, so it's
fascinating.
getting outside of
Yeah.
the what is it that we're trying to do? And some of the companies that are really working at flattening the organization and creating these more living systems are looking at their purpose always in terms of how it is facilitating flourishing for their
Mm-hmm.
customers,
Mm-hmm.
supporting their customers in broader
Mm-hmm.
ways. So
Mm.
um, yeah.
That's great. So
And
yeah.
communities
Mm-hmm.
could do the same thing,
Yeah.
but
Tell us about that.
well, I
How
mean, if you
what
just
could that look like?
if you think of as communities like either local governments or local businesses within a community, looking at purpose um, is is really to help the community flourish.
Mm-hmm.
And if everyone in the community is flourishing, not only do we continue to grow and evolve together, and so even just having that simple higher purpose of how is what we're doing helping the community and the members of it to flourish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. So tell us, Cheri, how do you bring this work into your life in terms of, I know you've done some really interesting uh, work in Ecuador recently. What is
Mhm.
this process of appreciative inquiry or facilitating conversations that matter or helping people flourish? What does that look like in some of your day-to-day work?
It kind of takes on two different um, faces.
Mm-hmm.
The one in Ecuador, which we just completed was a conscious leadership retreat for women.
Mm,
And I could not have imagined how good this ended up being. And I think part of it was the location.
mm,
The Ecuador and the Andes have their own magic to them.
mm-hmm,
Uh, and the Andean people are, the indigenous people there are really focused on growing consciousness
mm,
of uh, the planet, especially. So I think that energy was in the space.
mm,
And then that work is really all about how do we how do we lead from a place of recognizing we're an integral part of the whole,
mm,
and how do we help everyone that we are working with, flourish and come alive and support, at every level flourishing. And so being able to have conversations worth having supports that, using appreciative inquiry as a framework for growth in the organization supports that as well. And then there's also that internal piece of how am I making sure to bring my whole self in. So I mean, one of the things, as I'm sure you know, as a woman in as a woman that leads in this culture, um, we there's a tendency to suppress
mm,
the feminine,
mm,
and yet that's what's absolutely needed right now in our
mm-hmm,
organizations and in the world. This bringing in the heart, bringing in the wisdom of connection and relationship. And so there's that inner work as well of how do I make sure that I'm not oppressing my own feminine
mm-hmm,
energy? How am I nourishing myself?
mm-hmm,
And then the other piece, which is a smaller piece of that process, is really focusing on the conversations worth having work. And that has taken on a life of its own.
mm-hmm,
We only intended to write the book, and then people said, do you have training? And then people said, do you offer certification? And
mm-hmm,
so we have this vision of a world where we can have conversations that allow us to create flourishing for everyone.
mm-hmm,
And the only way we can do that is to put the tools and the practices in the hands of as many people as possible, as
mm-hmm.
fast as possible. So,
Beautiful.
yeah.
Well, so when people say, "Well, I want to be able to ground this more in my everyday life," this process of
Mm,
how do I have a conversation that matters, or how do I lead from a place that is from the heart?
yeah,
Walk us through some of those tools that people might be able to start to implement. We know the book is a resource that people
right.
can use, and we'll certainly ask at the end about places people can learn more. But what do those more specific tools and steps look like for people in their everyday lives? You've started to share a little bit, but if you could walk us through a little bit deeper, that would be great.
Sure. Um, I think the I think the biggest practice, or the most powerful practice anybody can bring into their lives to support well-being and strong relationships, is asking generative questions.
Mm,
Um, and it's simply moving yourself into a place of genuine curiosity about the other person, and out of that place of I know what needs to happen, or I know what's best.
mm-hmm,
And just let me give you a couple of examples. One of the trainings we did recently, a woman came back on the second day, and we'd asked people, did you try this? And people typically try this in their families before they try it anywhere
right.
else. Nice, safe
The home
place to
zone.
try something.
Right.
um,
Easy territory
yes.
always.
And she said, and she actually broke down in tears as she was
Mm,
sharing this. She said, I have 3 adult children, and they're like in all different places. And I have tried, for years, I'll call them up, um, and they won't share with me, and they don't really want to talk. And she said, I know I know they're adults, but I'm their mother. I'm wiser. I have things that, they should hear from me. And she said, I realized I'm not listening to them at
Mm,
all. I'm never inquiring into their lives and what's going on. And so she said, last night I went home and I called each one of them individually and I just asked questions. What's happening? How are the kids? What have you been doing? And she said, every one of them talked for at least 30 minutes, blah, 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 on and on
uh-huh.
and on. They were so excited to share what was going on. And she said, I just sat in awe of
Uh-huh.
how much I'd been in the way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and um, and then another example of uh, and this is an example from an education program um, of one of the employees who had lots of potential, but for some reason um, was just rubbing people the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
um, and the that woman's supervisor um, was conflict avoidant, and
Mm-hmm.
so just kept, um, trying not trying to ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then finally got to the point where there were so many complaints. She went to talk to someone that is one of our certified trainers and said, I think we're going to have to fire this person. And Jamie said, wait a minute, let me talk with her first.
Mm-hmm.
And so she brought her in. Um, and uh, and in the course of the conversation started asking her, um, if are you aware that the way you treat the students and the parents is just amazing, and you treat the people you work with a little differently than that.
Mm-hmm.
And just asking that question, she started to reflect on it, and she was like, oh my goodness, I need to change. So she came to that awareness herself of,
Mm-hmm.
I need to change the way I'm doing. So I'm treating everybody this way. And Jamie said, well, do you know why that was happening? And she said, I think probably because I'm the newest person here and I probably wasn't feeling very secure, but I feel very secure with students and parents.
Mm-hmm.
And so just asking those couple of questions,
Yeah.
everything turned around, and her supervisor came back to Jamie and said, I don't know what you did, but she is amazing. We're so happy
Oh,
she's
how
here.
interesting. Right.
So just
Mm-hmm.
being able to ask generative questions, and those, again, the four things they do. A generative question changes the way we think. They're open-ended and they come from a place of genuine curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And they either make the invisible visible, like assumptions, bias, expectations, what's hidden behind someone's behavior,
Mm-hmm.
or they help create shared understanding. You get to, what's your point of view? What's your perspective? Where are you coming from? Um, with a group of people, you can tap into collective intelligence. So new knowledge comes into the group. And then inspiring possibilities is just, asking the what if or how might we do
Mm-hmm.
something,
Mm.
those kinds of questions. And you can do those anywhere, anytime. It creates a positive feedback loop. So when you do it, you're like, oh my goodness, that changed the relationship. And so you want to do more of it.
Uh-huh.
And the second practice is simply talking about what you want instead of what you don't want. It's positive
Mm.
framing. If you've got a
Mm-hmm.
problem, what is it that this relationship isn't working? Instead of trying to figure out what's not working and fix it, it's, well, what kind of relationship do we want? When have
Mm-hmm.
we had that? Let's do more of that.
Mm-hmm. I love that. So the positive, building the positive, creating the conditions for people to come to their own awarenesses and learning, letting their own intuitive sense of knowing kind of lead the way. And the energy builds energy. It's, so
Yes.
so true. It's so fascinating. The framing that you bring. My own life. One of my COVID areas of focus or projects, if you will, was to become a yoga teacher. I've been doing yoga since I was
Oh,
17. But yoga's changed a lot since I was 17, the way it's practiced in the States, at least, although, of course, it's, thousands. year old tradition with
Yeah.
so much grounding. And I did a lot of dance, but dance classes moved online, and that wasn't very exciting to dance online. So I did start an online yoga teacher training as a way to stay in my body. And over the years, I realized, 5 or 7 years ago, or maybe even 8 years ago, I lived a lot of the first 2/3 of my life from the head up,
Yeah.
and the importance of, yeah, living in my body. So it became really important to me to continue moving in COVID and staying in my body and staying grounded and having a practice. And so an opportunity came up for me to teach at a local studio here a few
Mm.
months ago. And I keep, it's fun. It pushes a lot of my edges. If I have a small class, it brings up all kinds of stuff.
Yep.
And my mantra, if you will, not even in the formal sense of the term mantra, but for this year, 2023, the phrase that has been coming back up to me has been curiosity over control. Curiosity over control, curiosity over control. And it's been, when I recognize in my own life how often I try to, like, okay, well, if I control this, I can, from trying to create a sense of safety in the world, plan for this outcome and that everything will be okay. And then just how exhausting that is really over time. And so I've been saying, well, I don't totally know why I'm teaching yoga. I mean, I know why I'm teaching yoga, but I don't totally know. But I'm just experimenting with it and seeing what it brings up. It's a great opportunity for learning, for tending those parts of me that get, oh, it's a small class tonight. Tending with care to that part of myself, tapping into my heart. You were talking about that earlier. And to just allow spaces, but also to let myself move past my comfort zone of, oh, in this part of my work, I'm an expert. In this part of my work, and so also, how do I continue to bring beginner's mind to the other areas of work, but then also to really have beginner's mind in terms of teaching yoga and still stay authentic and grounded. It's been a great opportunity for learning, but that curiosity control has really been something I've come back to again and again and again. It's pretty
Yes.
interesting.
And I think that is it's such a beautiful mantra, curiosity over control,
Yeah,
because control is an illusion anyway. So,
it's a seductive one.
yeah,
I'll tell you
yes, it
that.
is.
Yeah. So, in a few moments, we'll bring it to you for some of our quick roller questions. But I just wanted to see, when you look out across the landscape, Cheri, about your work in your own life and the communities that you've worked with, what has really, what are some of the patterns that you've noticed about how communities are creating a sense of belonging, or growing or being strong? Where are you seeing some trends that either bring you some excitement or some things that you feel like we need to be focusing more at a broader scale?
Oh boy, that is a great question. Um, I think, I think the curiosity and control issue is a perfect descriptor of those communities that are coming from a place of curiosity. And again, I'm going to go back to that wholeness, that
Mm.
piece of how can we um, create greater spaces of um, food wealth in our
Mm-hmm.
communities that currently don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go about and they make it happen, uh, as opposed to at a more governmental or corporate level where they're trying to control how that happens. Or they're trying to create policy, or they're trying to create something else. Um, it it makes them less agile, and I think that's because they're coming from control and fear
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to that curiosity and let's just make it happen. What's
Mm-hmm.
stopping us? What's in our way? And so I think the more and more communities are looking at um, how do we collaborate in ways that um, create systems that are working for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we've got in the world in general, but we've got so many very complex challenges facing us.
Hmm.
And my whole being feels like if we could just bring um, great minds as well as people who are in those situations for which we need to create solutions, if we could bring them together so they could think together
Mm.
and be in a conversation, um, and look at innovative, creative ways, that there's nothing we can't solve if we can get politics out of the way and if we can stop trying to control it and instead work towards the desired outcomes.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So having people come together, thinking about what's possible, working in the realm of possibility.
Mhm.
Yeah. And even when
Oh,
you just brought up the term food wealth, I could feel that in my body. When I think about that positive framing, the
yeah,
difference in when I think about food deserts,
yep.
oh, a food desert, and the clenching and the holding and the fear versus how do we create food wealth? It really is an opening gesture. Oh, well,
Yes.
who's doing that? What's happening? And even I can feel that
Yeah,
generative energy within my body and that reframing. So what a beautiful example, Cheri,
yeah,
of just using that positive framing.
yep. And that you just said beautifully why positive framing is so powerful.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
fascinating. Yeah, in our work and with dialogue and design, we don't focus on the problems. We work in communities who, like any place, like any human community, place, ecosystem, there are problems, but we focus on solutions,
right.
still recognizing the problems. But if we focus on the problem, it does shut things down. And what you're saying just resonates so strongly for me when we create the positive framing, when we don't focus on the challenges, creating the opportunities for the wisdom that is inherent to arise from within. And how do we create those spaces to allow that flourishing to happen? Yes,
Yeah,
really beautiful.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Were you going to share something else a moment ago?
No, no, I think
Okay.
you just said it beautifully. That was a
Okay.
great summary.
Oh, I love the way that you're just bringing it up. Like, oh, it's just, yeah, it's so rich, so rich. So I want to bring it back to you as we get ready to close in the next little bit with some quick roller questions. Tell us, Cheri, what brings you joy in your life?
Um, Lots of things. One of them is what I've been sharing with you.
Mm,
I love people light up when they get how simple it is and how much power they have just with their own words.
hmm.
Um, just let me, I want to add this little
Yeah.
note. I got I got a message from somebody on LinkedIn the other day who was in graduate school, and he said, I'm a first generation college student, and I just read your book, and my parents, they're first generation immigrants, and this is the first time I have ever felt I actually have some control over what's going to happen in my life.
Mm,
So that's the
wow.
kind of, when your conversations can create change, you become powerful. So when I
Hmm.
watch people not only light up with that, but then start sharing examples of it, it makes my heart sing. So
Mm, beautiful.
um, I love expanding my own consciousness,
Hmm.
seeing connections and feeling um, more and more inclusive in the world. And then I love being outdoors in nature. I like dancing, being with family and friends, good food, some of the things everybody loves,
Yeah.
learning, continuous
Yeah.
growth.
I love that
Yeah.
continuous growth. I love that in your bio about, continuing to expand and learn. So probably some of those might be the same, but different. What keeps you moving forward on the days you struggle?
Um, I think my sense of urgency in the world right
Mm.
now.
Hmm.
I think I think we're getting close to a tipping point
Hmm.
where we're going to slide into something very positive. But if we don't reach the tipping point, um, uh, it could be very sad on the planet.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I do think there's a sense of urgency. And I also know that there are thousands and thousands of people around the world working to get that
Mm-hmm.
tipping point going. And so I think when I'm struggling, I just remind myself I'm not alone,
Mm-hmm.
and the energy of the whole being is wanting to survive and
Mm-hmm.
flourish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, tapping into the overall positive solution. Yeah, but
Yeah.
yeah, hear what you're saying about the sense of urgency. Tell us a little bit about what are some key lessons learned you'd share with others who are trying to create change in their communities and regions?
Um,
It's a big
uh,
question.
yeah, that is a big question. I would say find other people who are trying to create change and work together. Um, I would say be patient and compassionate with people who are fearful and want to stay in control, but don't try to change and commit and convince them to be otherwise, because that's very frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
And then you lose patience. And don't when you if you've got something that's coming alive in you that you want to make happen, go make it happen. Find people to make it happen with, and especially if the people that are connected. Anybody that's connected with it, go make it happen with them. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to impact the lives of somebody, bring those people into the process of creating change.
Mm-hmm. So key. So key.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Folks need to be at the table who are
Yeah.
decisions have an influence or direct impact on them for sure.
Yeah.
And what do you wish someone told you, Cheri, 5 or 10 years, 15 years ago, just about the work that you're engaged in general? It's really related to that last question, but I
Yeah.
love this question.
I actually think somebody probably did tell me
It's
five or
always
ten
the
years
case. It's
ago.
always the case for all of
and
us.
I and I kind of heard it intellectually, but I'm not sure that I was in a place where I could go, "Oh, yes."
Mm-hmm.
I think that's pretty recent. So it's probably less about what somebody else told me 5 or 10 years ago and more about, could I have been in a place of actually really
Mm,
hearing this 5 or 10 years
yeah.
ago? Um, and then it's like all things in their own time. And I
Mm-hmm.
probably heard this multiple times and it finally got to me at the full body level.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And is there a particular thing that really resonates for you with that about a specific, is there something that really landed for you recently, that learning that you want to reflect on?
Yes, it is the piece of um, all of us being an integral part of a whole living system.
Mm-hmm.
And when I try to share my excitement and enthusiasm with other people, I'm like, oh, that's how I used to think about it. Because I can see them going, yeah,
Uh-huh.
I got it. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, no, no, you don't.
Mm-hmm.
When you get
Mm-hmm.
it, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I have to change everything. It's like when I look back, everything changes. It's
Mm.
like the worldview changes. Um, and now I feel like I part of my journey is to figure out, how do I live from a place of being an integral part, that everything I do is either helping the system flourish or not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I suspect there are lots of my behaviors that I've got to change.
Mm. And what I hear in that is a felt sense of really living into feeling that you are part of that system and really knowing at a
Yes.
body level that you
Mhm.
are actively helping the system flourish or
Yeah.
not. Yeah.
Yes. And myself as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that I think you're right. It is the felt body level that was like, yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, beautiful. But what a just profound but simple way to frame that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So, what other thoughts or reflections would you like to share as we get ready to wrap up? And how can people learn more about you and your work? And we'll include all the resources in the show notes on the episode webpage.
Okay. The simplest way is probably to go to our website, which is
Mm-hmm.
conversationsworthhaving.today,
Okay.
or to the Sammy Project rise.org.
Great.
They're two different things. And we, yeah, I think the parting thing I would like to say is never doubt how powerful you can be in
Mm.
your community and your family and your organization. Uh, yeah, never doubt it. There's
Hmm.
so much more potential we all have that we haven't even tapped.
So beautiful. Yeah, has really been a theme that's been resonating a lot in conversations recently about that untapped potential and
Yeah,
how we create systems of flourishing together. So again, we'll
yeah.
include those links at yeswerise.org. Cheri, it's been a really just a delight and an honor to speak with you today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, and I love seeing the way that you light up, and obviously are lighting other people up to co-create this flourishing. So thank you for joining the podcast today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Hmm.